Zaxby's, indescribably good.
Good evening, Raider fans, and welcome back to another edition of the Rocky Hidalgo Show. Sponsored by Zaxby's, with 2 locations in East Cobb, one at Lower Roswell and Johnson's Ferry, the other one at Shallowford and Johnson's Ferry. And Coach Hidalgo, once again, the Raiders come off of a great victory on the road, defeating Wheeler 37-12. What are your thoughts on the victory? It was against a team that was a little bit weaker opponent, but a big rivalry game. But I would suggest you're probably pretty pleased with the way the outcome came around.
Yeah, I felt like the kids played really well. I tell you, I'll be honest with you, I think Wheeler played their best game against us. It was senior night. It's a big rivalry. Coach Collins did a great job preparing his kids, and they really wanted to win the game. They came out and executed really well on offense. I felt like we controlled the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. We threw the ball very well on offense. Bradley was very efficient at quarterback. Kyle ran the ball very hard. Defensively, I felt like we ran around, tackled pretty well. So all in all, it was a good night. We had a couple of guys get dinged up, and that was unfortunate. But for the most part, we were really satisfied with the way we played.
Coach, one of the players we don't talk about a whole lot here on the show just because he's call him kind of a lunch pail guy, but John Ficarota had a really good night on Friday night. He and Bradley hooked up. The papers did a nice job talking about that. But talk a little bit about just kind of John's work ethic and how he goes about his business.
He's a tough kid. I mean, he's the guy who does all the grunt work. He blocks out there on the edge for us. He runs all the routes inside and where all the traffic where you get hit. The guy's had his chin busted 2 or 3 times this year. He doesn't miss any time. They just put some Band-Aids on it. He rolls back out there. Can't say enough about a guy like that. He's a physical kid. He's a strong kid. He spent his time in the weight room. And he does all the little things that help you win. Everybody wants to go out and catch a football and score touchdowns. John does that, but in addition to that, he does all those little things that requires those sacrifices that help you win championships.
Now, Coach, you were saying earlier that watching the film and the progression over the season, you can really start to see the improvement. And that's one of the things we talked about early in the season, was you felt that in that last third of the season, you see a young team really make that leap forward. Is that what you are seeing now?
Yeah, we were watching tape yesterday. We spent a lot of time watching our kids on tape, and we're seeing a lot of improvement by our young players. I think you see Darren and Zach Blaylock kind of growing up in the secondary. Justin Brooks and Dedrick Sunby, 2 guys, juniors at linebacker, playing well. Cody Richardson, Kelly Brooks, Cody Allen, doing a good job, and they get a little better every week. I think you've noticed the stat sheet. We've got a lot more guys getting out there on defense, assisted tackles.
Right.
Previously, we had a lot of guys, a lot of solo tackles and very few assists. Now we've got 3, 4, 5 hats around the ball. Guys really out there trying to make plays. I think defensively we're playing with a little more confidence. We're really starting to learn what's going on over there. Offensively, we're getting a little more consistent with our offensive line. We've got to do a better job at wide receiver, kind of learning where to line up. We do a lot of different formations, and that's one thing we're still struggling with a little bit right there, because we do so much in regards to our formation. So our young guys have got to kind of pick up on that, and with Trip Roberts, who may or may not be out, we've got to make sure that those guys pick up the slack.
And you made the comparison from last year's team that the special teams this year have been a lot better and have actually been an additive part of the team.
Yeah, Zach Miller's done a great job kicking the ball off. I think we've got very good field goal kicking out of Zach and Nathan Dittmer. I think Nakia Poole has been steady Eddie back there punting the football. Right. He's done a great job punting the balls and really has kept us in some games and given us an opportunity to win some games because of his leg. Our coverage has been really good on the kickoff teams and the punt teams. We're really still trying to push to get something in the return game. And that's kind of what we're after. We want to make that an offensive play for us.
I read the other day, Coach, that Nebraska had their first kickoff return since 1946, so sometimes it takes a long time. Hopefully not that long for the Raiders. So you go from a rivalry game at Wheeler, and you go back a little bit in time here now to a rivalry game in the mid-'90s. That was a big rivalry game. I remember one time Eric Zier told me he said one of the biggest losses and disappointments he ever had in high school was losing to Walton. And you go to a very difficult stadium environment to play at Marietta, playing in town. Talk a little bit about what it's like to go there and play at that stadium. You've always said that you love coaching there.
Yeah, I love coaching there because everything's on top of you. There's no track there. You've only got about 10 feet of sideline on the visitor sideline. So, the visitor stands, all your fans are in the huddle with you over there on the sideline. It's a neat place. I mean, it's just electric over there. It's an older stadium. It's built in a neighborhood. It's kind of all those things that go along with old school football that I really enjoy. When you go over there, I've got great memories of coaching against great players and coaching some great teams over there, seen some great things on both sides of the football. So for me, it's really a special place to go over and coach. I love coaching at Northcutt. It's outside of Raider Valley. It's probably my favorite place to coach.
A little bit like Wrigley Field. It's just very intimate, sits right there in the neighborhood. Now, Marietta has a new coaching staff. This season, there's probably been a little bit of a disappointment with them. They're 2-6. But they are one of those teams, when you get them at home, if you come in ill-prepared, you're going to get jumped and you're going to find yourself in a real fight. What can we look for from Marietta as we go to the game on Friday night?
Well, Coach Burton, the new coach over there, has done a great job getting his kids really to play hard. I mean, when you watch them on tape, they play hard on both sides of the football. Obviously, when you come take over a program, I think he's got some work to do in the weight room. They've got to get a little bigger and stronger. But nobody's going to fault their effort. They really play hard over there. They've got very good skilled players on both sides of the ball, a lot of foot speed on defense. So what you're going to see is they like to spread the football out, and they want to get guys, some athletes out in space. For our kids, we've talked about them. They've got to be patient. They're going to create some plays. We've got to make sure that their big plays don't go for touchdowns, and we've got to make them earn every yard they get. If they break something, it needs to go for 20 and not for 70. Offensively, we've got to get in there and be patient running the football. We've got a size advantage, a size and strength advantage over them. So we want to make sure that we get in there and run the ball hard. We've got to get a hat on a guy and really run down the field. Defensively, they can really run around, so that'll create some problems because they can kind of get off blocks and get back in the mix there and make some tackles that most teams we play probably wouldn't have the ability to do. So it's going to be a hard-fought game. I know it's senior night for them. It's their last home game of the season, so their kids are going to be jacked up, ready to play over there.
Rocky, you're talking about 16, 17, 18-year-old boys. Some of the boys are 18 years old. They know what is the next game after the Marietta game, which is the Woodstock game, where Woodstock could come in here after getting upset against Etowah last week. How do you work to keep a team focused on the game at hand?
The Woodstock game doesn't mean anything if we don't win this game.
Right.
And that's it. And we talk about it all the time. The kids know that game's out there. That's an important game. But so is the Marietta game. The Marietta game is just as important because if we don't go out and play well in this one, the Woodstock game doesn't matter. It's just a game.
Right.
And we're playing for playoff seeding and all those, all of that stuff. But this game is important because if we play this, it secures a playoff spot. It secures us the very worst third in the region. So we want to make sure that we go out and play well on Friday night. Our kids know that. We've talked about that before the Cherokee game. And that's something that I see them growing up. They're coming out. They came out and practiced well today. And, I think it's a sign we're a little more mature than we were probably 2 or 3 weeks ago.
And I guess one of the oldest cliches is you take them one at a time, but you have to. I mean, people laugh when they hear that, but you can't think ahead to the next game. You've got to just play the one that's right in front of you.
No, and we don't have enough talent. We've got a good football team, but we don't have enough talent. We don't have 11 Division I players out there that we can look past somebody. And especially a team like Marietta, they've got a lot of foot speed and a lot of athleticism. We're not ready to play. They'll make us pay for it. I think our kids understand that, and they'll be ready to go on Friday night.
Well, we're going to take a break here before we jump to the special part of the show when Rocky and I pick some of our games for the upcoming weekend. But now, a word from our sponsor, Zaxby's.
Zaxby's, indescribably good.
Well, Rocky, a tough weekend for a guy growing up in Louisiana. If you're a Falcons fan or an Auburn fan, you don't feel sorry for Rocky at all. But the LSU Tigers go down 24-17 to Auburn. But then I guess the bigger surprise is that the Cleveland Browns come into the Superdome yesterday, and 2 touchdown interceptions returned for touchdowns, and the Saints lose a shocker to the Browns. But to your point about Marietta, here are the Saints playing at home against a team that they should beat on paper every day. You make a couple mistakes, and next thing you know, you're at the wrong end of the score.
In the NFL, really and truly, the talent level is so close between all the teams. It doesn't take much for one team to upset the other one. That's why a lot of guys make a lot of money getting people to bet on those games. There's a very thin margin for error up there, and it's tough being the guy on top, that carrying that #1 ranking and being champions. That gets a little heavier every week, and everybody's out to get you. And I think the Saints are learning about that right now.
I guess if you're Gene Chizik right now, you probably wouldn't. No one doesn't not want to be #1, but in the middle of the season, being #1 is almost more of a distraction than it's worth, I would guess.
I don't know. I've never been that way. I've been there for that long, but I can tell you right now, if you talk to guys like Alabama and Ohio State and Oklahoma, it puts a big bullseye on your chest. having come through those games that Auburn has come through, and the South Carolinas and the Kentuckys and the LSU this weekend, and Arkansas. I mean, it gets tougher every week to play like that, and they've made some great plays, but at some point in time, those great plays run out. Usually you have one of those games where a guy doesn't make 5 guys miss, and it's unfortunate, but it does. And I think they've got a great football team, but I still think it's going to be tough for them to go undefeated just because of the schedule they've got out there. They've got Alabama out there, and it is what it is.
Well, the first game we want to talk about is the large gathering at Jacksonville. Is that what we're allowed to call it?
That's it.
The large gathering at Jacksonville, featuring the Bulldogs against Florida. Georgia seems to have turned a corner. A lot of people would make the claim or the comment that if Auburn overlooks Georgia the way Georgia's playing, they're going to have a tough game. But Georgia's on an upswing. Florida's struggling right now, not playing real well, but the Gators seem to own the Bulldogs.
It all comes down to, I kind of find it ironic. 4 or 5 weeks ago, people wanted to fire Mark Richt, and he lost his touch. He had forgotten how to coach. Coaches don't forget how to coach. They don't forget what they know. It is all about players, and sometimes you just have some bad luck, and things break your way, and things don't break your way. I think Georgia, if you watch Georgia, they've done a great job coaching that team. They kind of hung in there. They just kept coaching. We talked about that earlier in the season about with our kids, our young kids, just going out, and you just have to go out and coach. They've gone out and coached, and their team's playing well, and they might be playing the best of any of the teams in the East right now. Given that, they've got to play with some confidence. Florida's had an off week to kind of get out there and kind of work the kinks out. I think they'll play better this week, but, I look for Georgia to go down and actually win this one. I think they're playing good football, and I think they've got a pretty good quarterback, a guy out there making plays at quarterback. So I'll go with the Bulldogs.
Yeah, I think you're right there. And then, Auburn goes to Mississippi this weekend, so they've got the #1 ranking, and so the first thing you get is you get a road trip in the SEC. You go to Mississippi, play in the evening at 6 o'clock against the Rebel Bears. It seems to be one of those situations where, it might be a tough place to play, but you got to think that Auburn's got the talent and the focus that they've got to come through this one.
Everybody talks about those trap games. Ole Miss has come a long way since the beginning of the year. Masoli, I think, is getting a little better. They've struggled a little bit on defense. I do think the guy they've got, the trigger man that Auburn has, is pretty special. I think they'll pull that game out in Ole Miss, but I think it's going to be tight.
Then another big game you've got this week is down on the West Coast, where Oregon travels to USC, and Oregon #1 in the polls, Auburn #1 in the BCS. But both of these teams score points in bunches, and you would almost think this turns into a track meet.
I have no idea what's going to go on out there, but I do want to record it. It'll probably take about 5 hours off the DVR. Oregon, my gosh, they can just score some points. It's pretty interesting watching those guys play because everything is. It looks like you're watching a game in fast forward. I'll take the Ducks. Even though their uniforms are ugly, I'll take those guys. I think they're not great on defense, but gosh, how do you slow them down? That's the question.
I heard a stat the other day or something along these lines that their average drive was somewhere around 70 to 75 yards, and it took them 2 minutes and 22 seconds to score each time. So they get down the field, and their rhythm is incredible. I think that USC might upset them, though. I don't know. Bob McLeod says we always pick the same games. And then, of course, next Sunday night, my home team, the Pittsburgh Steelers, travel down to play the New Orleans Saints. And I know you're going to pick the Saints, and I'm going to pick the Steelers. But you have to be a little worried about the way Breeze is playing, particularly with the Steeler defense coming.
Yeah, it is what it is. They're struggling a little bit right now, and evidently they're still celebrating in the locker room some. I'll pick the Saints just because I'm a Houdat man. But at some point in time, they've got to start righting that ship and try to get in the playoffs or to keep this season from being a complete disaster. But I'll go with the Saints.
Well, and one of the things I heard yesterday was interesting is that with Roethlisberger now back, the Steelers are throwing the ball a lot more, getting away from that running game that really was setting the tone for them early in the season, even with their second, third, and fourth-string quarterbacks. But hopefully the Steelers come away with that Sunday night victory. But most importantly, folks, this Friday night, the Walton Raiders travel to Northcutt Stadium to play the Marietta Blue Devils at 7:30 Friday night. Love to see you there. Get there early. It is hard to get a seat at that stadium, and it's even harder to get a parking place. But this has been another edition of the Rocky Hidalgo Coaches Show, sponsored by Zaxby's.